She found her daughter sitting beside a stranger, and for the first time in 14 months, Lila was smiling. Not the polite, hollow smile Sienna had coached her through 100 therapy sessions. A real one, the kind that started in the eyes before the mouth even knew what to do with itself. Sienna Ashford had spent 2 years building a financial empire worth 9 figures. She had negotiated mergers that made senior partners sweat through their suits. She had walked into rooms full of powerful men and walked out with everything she came for. But standing in the marble lobby of the Harrington Grand Hotel on a Tuesday morning in November, watching her 6-year-old daughter laugh quietly with a construction worker she had never met, Sienna felt the ground shift beneath her feet in a way no boardroom ever had. How does a man like that accomplish in 15 minutes what 14 months of specialists couldn't? Plus, before we go any further, if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. These are the kinds of stories that stay with you. While you're at it, drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Chicago and to the moment everything changed. The alarm on Sienna's phone went off at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before she had set it. She was already awake. She lay in the darkness of the master bedroom of her Lincoln Park townhouse, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness of someone who had stopped pretending she was going to fall back asleep. The sheets beside her were cold and undisturbed, as they had been for the past 4 years. On the nightstand, a half-finished glass of water, 2 folders she'd been reviewing past midnight, and a framed photo of Lila at age 4, before everything got harder, laughing at something off camera with her whole face, the way kids do when nobody's told them yet to be self-conscious about it. Sienna reached over and turned the alarm off before it rang. She sat up slowly, pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a long moment, and then got on with the morning. By 5:15, she was dressed. Dark charcoal blazer, cream blouse, hair pinned back with the kind of precision that looked effortless because she'd been doing it for a decade. By 5:40, she was downstairs in the kitchen, standing over the counter with the coffee she was drinking too fast, and a schedule on her tablet she was already resenting. The Midwest Commercial Development Summit ran from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. She had agreed to sit on a panel at 10, deliver remarks at noon, and hold 3 back-to-back private meetings in the afternoon with partners from firms she couldn't afford to alienate. The original plan had been simple. Lila would stay with their housekeeper, Donna, who had been with the family since Lila was 2 and knew her routines better than most people knew their own. But Donna had called the previous evening with a voice like gravel, some kind of flu, the fast-moving kind. And by 8 o'clock, she had already canceled. Sienna's backup option, her sister Renata, lived 40 minutes north and had 2 kids of her own and a husband who traveled. When Sienna called, Renata picked up on the second ring, listened for about 30 seconds, and then said very carefully, "See, I love you, but Lila had a meltdown the last time she was here, and I still have the crayon on my dining room wall to prove it." There was no accusation in her voice, just honesty, which was somehow worse. "I know," Sienna had said. "Forget it. I'll figure it out." She had hung up and stood in her home office for several minutes, looking at nothing. The summit was not optional. The 3 afternoon meetings were not optional. The client she was protecting represented nearly $60 million in managed assets, and the Chicago office of Marlowe and Vance had been quietly circling them for the past 2 months. Missing today was not a professional inconvenience. It was a strategic vulnerability. So at 7:30 the next morning, Sienna lifted Lila gently from her bed, dressed her in her favorite gray sweater with a small embroidered fox on the collar, packed her a bag with her sketchbook, 3 colored pencils she would actually use, a soft-boiled egg in a container, and a pair of wireless headphones with the volume limiter set low. Then she carried her daughter through the cold November air to the car and told herself it would only be a few hours. The Harrington Grand sat on the edge of the magnificent mile like it had always been there and always intended to stay. 14 stories of limestone and glass, the kind of hotel that didn't need a sign out front because its regulars already knew where it was. The lobby had 30-foot ceilings, veined marble floors, and the particular hush of a place where sound was managed the way light was managed, deliberately, by people who understood its value. For Sienna, It was a familiar enough environment. She had attended events here before, met clients here, once closed a deal in the second-floor lounge that paid for 6 months of Lila's specialists. She knew the rhythms of the place, the layout, the alcoves where you could take a call without being overheard. What she hadn't accounted for was how the lobby would feel to a 6-year-old who found crowds overwhelming. Lila stood beside her mother at the check-in desk, one hand wrapped in Sienna's, her sketchbook pressed against her chest with the other. Her eyes were moving the way they always did in new spaces, not anxiously exactly, but with the careful tracking of someone taking inventory. The bellhops wheeling luggage, the sound of conversation multiplying off the marble. A group of suited executives laughing too loudly near the elevator bank. Each of those things registered on Lila's face in small increments, a slight tightening around the eyes, a shift in the grip on her mother's hand. "You okay?" Sienna asked, looking down at her. Lila gave a single nod, the kind that meant, "I'm managing." They found a sitting area off the main lobby, slightly removed from the traffic. A cluster of low chairs and a side table near a tall window that looked out onto the street. Sienna settled Lila into the chair closest to the window, opened the sketchbook to a clean page, laid the colored pencils beside it, and crouched down in front of her daughter. "I have to go to a meeting on the second floor," she said. "I'll be back in 90 minutes. Donna's going to—" She stopped herself. "Right. Not Donna. I'm going to ask someone at the front desk to check on you every 20 minutes, okay? You have your phone." She held it up briefly, then tucked it into the side pocket of Lila's bag where she could reach it. "If anything feels wrong, you call me. Immediately. I don't care what I'm in the middle of." Lila looked at her steadily. "I know, Mom." Not upset, not scared, just patient in the way she'd learned to be patient with a mother who needed to be reassured more than she ever admitted. Sienna kissed the top of her head, stood up, adjusted her blazer. She was halfway across the lobby when she turned back once more, almost involuntarily. Lila had already opened the sketchbook and was holding a blue pencil, staring at the blank page the way she always did before starting something, with the expression of a person deciding what world to build. Sienna turned back toward the elevator. "What?" The panel was called Capital Strategy in a Shifting Urban Market, and it went 11 minutes over schedule because the moderator kept asking follow-up questions to the man from Boston who liked the sound of his own voice. Sienna answered the questions directed at her with the precise efficiency of someone who had learned to say a great deal while revealing very little, and when the applause broke, she was already calculating how much time she had before the next obligation. 43 minutes. She slipped out of the conference room and moved toward the elevator with her phone in her hand. 2 texts from her assistant, Marcus. 1 voicemail from the Boston office. Nothing from the front desk. Nothing from Lila's phone. She pressed the lobby button. The elevator descended. The doors opened. Sienna stepped out into the lobby and immediately understood that something was different, though it took her a moment to identify what. The sitting area near the tall window, the chairs she had left Lila in, was empty. The sketchbook was gone. The colored pencils were gone. The bag was still there. Sienna stood very still for approximately 2 seconds. Then she moved. She crossed the lobby in long strides, scanning left first, then right, checking the restroom corridor, the gift shop entrance, the narrow hallway that led toward the conference rooms. She approached the front desk and asked, with a voice that she held deliberately level, whether anyone had seen a small girl in a gray sweater with a fox on it. The young woman behind the desk looked uncertain. A colleague leaned over and said he thought he'd seen a child heading toward the far side of the lobby, maybe 10 minutes ago. Far side of the lobby. Sienna moved. She found Lila 12 seconds later. Her daughter was sitting in a deep alcove near the hotel's side corridor, an area slightly apart from the main flow, where 2 chairs had been positioned against the wall for guests who needed a quieter moment. Lila was in one of the chairs. Beside her, in the other, sat a man Sienna had never seen before. He was maybe early 30s, with the kind of build that didn't come from a gym, broader across the shoulders than most men in this hotel, with hands that had actual calluses on them, which Sienna registered with some part of her brain even at a distance. He was wearing a navy work shirt with a company logo on the breast pocket, dark canvas work pants, and steel-toed boots that had clearly been worn in. He had a sketchbook open across his knee, Lila's, Sienna realized, and the two of them were looking at something in it together. The man said something quietly. Sienna couldn't hear the words from where she stood. And then Lila laughed. Not a polite sound, not the careful, managed response Sienna had watched her daughter deploy in therapy sessions when a specialist asked a question she was trying to answer correctly. A real laugh. Short, surprised, like something had caught her off guard. Sienna stopped walking. She was aware, distantly, that her heart was doing something irregular. She was also aware that she was standing in the middle of a hotel lobby with her mouth slightly open, which was not something she made a habit of. Lila pointed to something on the sketchbook page. The man nodded slowly, tilting his head to look at it from a different angle, like he was taking it seriously. He said something else. Lila said something back. Her voice was quiet but audible. Not the near whisper she defaulted to around strangers, but a real voice carrying actual words in an actual sentence. Sienna had not heard her daughter hold a spontaneous conversation with a stranger since before her 7th birthday. She crossed the remaining distance slowly, the way you approach something fragile that you don't want to disturb. The man became aware of her when she was about 10 feet away. He looked up, not startled, more like he'd sensed movement and simply turned to identify it. His eyes were a kind of dark gray, set under a straight brow, and his expression when he looked at her was neutral in a way that wasn't unfriendly. He just wasn't particularly easy to read. Lila turned at the same moment. Mom. Hi, baby. Sienna crouched down in front of her daughter and placed one hand on her knee, scanning her quickly. Fine. She was fine. No distress. If anything, she looked settled, which was not a word Sienna would have expected to apply to Lila in a hotel lobby on a Tuesday morning. Are you okay? Yeah. Lila held up the sketchbook. Cole said my perspective lines are really consistent. Sienna blinked. She looked at the man. He was already shifting slightly in his chair, not exactly uncomfortable, but with the body language of someone who understood that the mother of a small child needed to be the one to set the temperature of the next 30 seconds. Cole Barrett, he said, and extended a hand. Not standing, he seemed to sense that standing would make the size differential more alarming than the moment called for. Just offering his hand across the short space between them, straightforwardly. Sienna shook it. His grip was what she expected, firm without performing. Sienna Ashford, she's mine. Yeah, I figured. A small movement at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. She was sitting in the main lobby looking like she was ready to draft a battle plan, and I was heading through. My daughter does the same thing in new spaces, sits very still and watches everything. He paused. Lila asked me if I knew anything about architecture. I told her I know a little. He builds things, Lila said with a tone of significant approval. He does. Sienna looked at him again. What are you building here? 3rd floor renovation, structural reinforcement on the east wing. He said it plainly, without the kind of embellishment people use when they're trying to impress someone. Just information. I've been on site for about 6 weeks. Another 3 to go if the timeline holds. Sienna nodded slowly. There was a pause in the conversation that neither of them rushed to fill. Lila, unbothered by it entirely, turned back to her sketchbook and began drawing something new. Her blue pencil moved in careful, deliberate strokes along the bottom edge of the page, laying in what looked like the foundation of a building. Sienna straightened up, watching her daughter draw for a moment before she turned back to Cole. She doesn't usually talk to people she doesn't know. She mentioned that. He said it without making it a thing. Not that so sad or well, she seemed fine with me. The 2 responses Sienna had learned to dread from people who meant well but had no idea what they were stepping into. Just, she mentioned that. Acknowledging the information. Moving past it. Sienna studied him for a moment. He sat with a kind of physical ease that she didn't see often in men who weren't performing relaxation. It wasn't the loose sprawl of someone who'd stopped caring. It was more like stillness with attention, like someone who had spent time in environments where being quiet and observant was a tool, not a personality trait. She didn't know where that thought came from. She filed it. I have to get back upstairs, she said. I have another meeting in 20 minutes. She looked down at Lila. You okay here? In this spot? Lila looked up briefly from the sketchbook. Yeah. Then with the careful consideration of a child choosing her words, can I keep talking to Cole? Cole looked at Sienna. The look said, this is entirely your call. For a little while, Sienna said. I'll come back down at lunch. She pulled out her phone, wrote her number on the edge of a business card, not the formal one, a plain card she used for moments like this, and set it on the end table within Cole's line of sight. She didn't hand it to him exactly, she just made it available. If anything changes, she said. Yeah, he said. She nodded. She looked at Lila one more time, her daughter, who was already drawing again, lower lip slightly tucked between her teeth in concentration, as relaxed as Sienna had seen her in longer than she could immediately remember. She walked back toward the elevator. In the reflection of the closing elevator doors, she could see the alcove, and the two figures sitting in it, and her daughter's hand moving steadily across the page. The noon session ran long. The first afternoon meeting started late and ended with a complication that required Marcus to reschedule 2 calls. By the time Sienna made it back down to the lobby, it was past 1 o'clock and she had a headache building behind her left eye. She found Lila in the same alcove, alone now, eating the soft-boiled egg from her bag with the focused satisfaction of a child who had decided to eat lunch entirely on her own schedule. Where's Cole? Sienna asked. He had to go back upstairs. Lila considered this. He said his crew needs him. A pause. Mom, did you know they have to measure things like 12 times before they cut anything? Because if you cut it wrong, you can't undo it. I did know that. Cole says that's true for a lot of things. Lila looked up at her. Not just construction. Sienna sat down in the chair Cole had vacated. The leather was still faintly warm. She picked up the sketchbook, carefully because Lila's things were sacred and she knew it, and turned to the last page her daughter had been working on. It was a building, not a child's drawing of a building, not the boxy rectangle with 4 windows and a triangle roof. This was something with foundations visible below the ground line, with floors differentiated by ceiling height, with what looked like load-bearing walls marked differently from partition walls, as if someone had explained the distinction. Sienna stared at it for a long moment. Did Cole help you draw this? He told me what things were called. Lila took another bite of her egg. The drawing is mine. Sienna set the sketchbook down slowly. She looked at the empty chair. Outside the tall window, Chicago went on doing what it did. Traffic and wind and November sky pressing low and gray over everything, the way it did every year as the city prepared to get colder and harder and more itself. Sienna sat with her daughter and the sketchbook and the warm chair and didn't say anything for a while. She was thinking about a man who had talked to her daughter like she was worth talking to, who hadn't explained the interaction when Sienna arrived, or performed patience for an audience, or looked for credit, who had simply done what seemed natural to him and left when his crew needed him, and told a 6-year-old that you can't undo a wrong cut. She was thinking about what kind of person walks around carrying wisdom like that, and doesn't seem to know they have it. She pulled out her phone, not to call anyone, just to hold it. Lila finished her egg, recapped the container neatly, and picked up her blue pencil again. Can we come back tomorrow? She asked. Sienna looked at her daughter's profile, the set of her jaw, the way she was already looking at the blank page with that decisive private energy that used to terrify Sienna because she couldn't tell if it was withdrawal or simply concentration, and somewhere along the past year the two had gotten hard to tell apart. It didn't look like withdrawal today. The summit runs through tomorrow, Sienna said carefully. I know. Lila began to draw. I just want to see the building when it's more finished. Sienna watched her for another moment. We'll see, she said. Which, for Sienna Ashford, was a thing she said when she already knew the answer. She told herself she was being practical. That was what Sienna repeated in the back of her mind on Wednesday morning as she and Lila rode the elevator down to the Harrington Grand's lobby again. The summit's second day had 2 panels she actually needed to attend, and the hotel's childcare service had a 3-hour wait list. and it made logistical sense to let Lila sit in the same quiet alcove where she had been perfectly calm and self-contained the day before. That was the reasoning. It was clean and defensible and had nothing to do with the fact that Sienna had spent 20 minutes the previous night with her laptop open, running a search she told herself was just due diligence. Cole Barrett, Chicago, Illinois. Construction. What came back was thin by the standards of someone she was curious about. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 2 years. Job title listed as Site Supervisor, Barrett Construction Group. A company she cross-referenced and found was properly licensed, bonded, with a clean record through the city contractor database. A Facebook account that was essentially inactive. No criminal record, no civil litigation. One archived news item from a local paper in downstate Illinois, dated 8 years ago, about a Navy SEAL from Carbondale being awarded a commendation she didn't immediately recognize the name of. The article was short. It didn't say much about what he'd done to earn it. She had closed the laptop at 11:15 and gone to bed. She had not slept particularly well. Lila walked beside her through the lobby now with her sketchbook under her arm, already scanning for the alcove, already oriented toward it like she'd been coming here for months. That was the other thing Sienna kept noticing and trying not to read too much into. The way her daughter moved through this space with something that looked dangerously close to comfort. The alcove was empty when they reached it. Of course it was. It was barely 8:30. Cole was presumably already upstairs with his crew. Lila sat down, opened her sketchbook to a new page, and began reviewing what she'd drawn the day before with the attentiveness of someone picking up a project they'd set aside but not abandoned. Sienna stood for a moment watching her, then sat in the adjacent chair. "You don't have to wait," Lila said, without looking up. "Your panel starts at 9. "I know when my panel starts." "Okay." Lila selected a pencil. "I'm just saying." Sienna looked at her daughter for another moment. The small, serious face, the careful way she held her pencil, the slight forward lean that meant she was already somewhere else in her head. Then she stood, adjusted her jacket, and crossed the lobby toward the conference rooms. She turned back once. Lila was already drawing. The panel that morning was called Navigating Regulatory Shifts in Urban Development, which was the kind of title that made Sienna's eyes go dry just reading it. But the content mattered. And she had things to say, and she said them with the particular precision she'd learned to use in rooms where sounding uncertain was more costly than being wrong. When it ended, she had 2 messages from Marcus and a missed call from her CFO about a variance report that needed her signature before 4. She was reading the messages in the hallway when she almost walked into someone coming around the corner from the stairwell. She stepped back. Cole stopped. He was in work clothes again. Same kind of canvas pants, a gray shirt this time, a hard hat tucked under one arm, and a set of rolled drawings under the other. There was a faint smear of something chalky on his forearm. He looked like he'd been up since before dawn, which he probably had. "Sorry," he said automatically, though neither of them had actually made contact. "No, I wasn't watching." She glanced at the rolled drawings. "Busy morning?" "We found a thing in the east wall." He said it with the flat economy of someone describing weather. "Wasn't in the original spec. Had to recalculate the load path." He adjusted the drawings under his arm. "How's Lila?" "Downstairs with her sketchbook." A pause. "She asked to come back." Something in his expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, more like quiet acknowledgement, the way you receive information you weren't expecting but don't want to make a production out of. "Emma's the same way when she finds a place that works," he said. "She'll want to go back every day until it stops working. Then she moves on." "Emma's your daughter?" "Yeah, she's 7. She's at school today." He said it in the tone of a man who had spent years managing the logistical algebra of single parenthood. The school schedules and the work schedules and the backup plans and the backup plans for the backup plans. The tone that wasn't complaint, just information. Sienna nodded slowly. "How long have you been doing it alone?" It was a more direct question than she'd intended, and she registered that half a second after it left her mouth. Cole didn't seem bothered by it. 4 years, he said. Emma was 3 when her mom left. It was... He stopped, rephrased. "It wasn't a good situation, and it got better when it ended. That's about as much as I usually say about it." "That's fair. What about you?" 6 years, she said. Lila's father left before she was born. We weren't married. He wasn't. She paused, choosing the same economy he'd used. He wasn't someone who was going to stay. Cole nodded. He didn't say anything sympathetic. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. A group of conference attendees came around the corner, talking loudly, and the moment broke apart naturally. Cole shifted the drawings back under his arm. I should get back up. If you don't mind, I'll check on Lila when I come down for lunch, if that's okay. Emma always wants someone checking the drawings. She'd like that, Sienna said. She watched him head back toward the stairwell, and then she turned and walked in the other direction, phone already in her hand, and did not think about the conversation for the rest of the morning with only moderate success. Lunchtime at the Harrington was a loosely choreographed chaos of catering staff and conference goers spilling between the ballroom and the lobby bar, and Sienna cut through it quickly, already scanning for the alcove. She was 6 feet away when she heard 2 voices, her daughter's, and one she now recognized. She slowed. Cole was sitting in his usual chair. She'd started thinking of it as his usual chair, which was a thing she noted and decided to examine later, with Emma's school day absence explained by the girl, who was very much not absent, sitting cross-legged on the floor between the 2 chairs with a sketchbook of her own open across her knees. Wait. Emma was supposed to be at school. Sienna came around the edge of the alcove, and Cole looked up and said immediately, "Half day. Teacher development or something. I had to bring her with me." He said it with the controlled apology of a parent who has explained an improvised logistical decision to a supervisor before. "She's not bothering anyone up on the floor. I had her sitting with my site manager, but she wanted to come down and draw, and I—" "It's fine," Sienna said, and meant it, which surprised her. Emma looked up. She had her father's coloring, dark hair, gray eyes, the same quality of watchful attention, though on a 7-year-old it came across less as stillness and more as intense evaluation. She studied Sienna for approximately 2 seconds with the frankness only children and very honest adults achieve, then looked back down at her sketchbook. "You're Lila's mom," Emma said to the page. "I am. Lila draws buildings." Emma was sketching something that looked like a person on a very tall ladder. "I draw people. We decided buildings and people go together." "That's actually correct," Sienna said. Emma looked up again at that, reassessing her. Then she moved the sketchbook slightly to show Lila something she was working on, and Lila leaned over to look with the focused attention she usually reserved for her own drawings, and the 2 of them went back to their respective pages in a companionable quiet that had the texture of a friendship that had somehow already accumulated time. Cole watched them for a second. Then he looked at Sienna, and she could see in his face the same thing she was probably showing in hers, which was something complicated and careful and not entirely comfortable, the way you look at something that is clearly good and you're not sure yet if you're allowed to trust it. He moved his jacket off the chair beside him in a gesture that wasn't quite an invitation and wasn't quite not one. Sienna sat down. They ordered sandwiches from the lobby cafe. Sienna flagged down a passing server. Cole reached for his wallet, and she shook her head once, briefly, and he let it go without the usual performance of protest. And for the next 40 minutes, they ate and talked in the intermittent way of 2 people who were aware they were figuring out the edges of something without agreeing to do so out loud. She learned. He had grown up in southern Illinois. One of 3 kids, father was a machinist, mother managed the books for a small equipment company. He'd gone into the Navy at 19 because he wanted the structure, and also, he said with characteristic flatness, because he needed to get out of his hometown before his hometown finished deciding who he was going to be. He did 2 tours, got selected for something he described only as special operations training, served for 11 years total before a knee injury and a marriage that was already failing, and a daughter who needed a father who was actually present combined into a decision that he said had taken him about 4 months to reach and about 4 minutes to execute once he'd made up his mind. He did not speak about what he'd done in the military in any specific terms. He answered questions in the way of someone who had learned to give the shape of a thing without the details, and Sienna, who dealt in information professionally, recognized the shape of that habit and respected it. She told him she had grown up in Boston, studied finance at Northwestern, started at a fund straight out of school, and made herself indispensable through the particular method of being right, more often than everyone around her and never making them feel bad about it, which was its own kind of skill. She built her own firm at 26. It was successful in the way that required giving up almost everything else, which she had done without fully accounting for what she was giving up until it was already gone. She said that last part in a voice that was maybe more honest than she intended, and Cole looked at her without filling the space that opened up afterward, which was the right thing to do, and she noted it. She wasn't always like this, Sienna said, after a moment, not explaining exactly, just saying it. Lila, she used to just talk, constantly, to everyone. She had this thing she used to do where she would introduce herself to strangers on the train and ask them what their favorite color was and why. A pause. Around 18 months ago, she just stopped. We never fully understood what triggered it. The therapists have their theories. What are the theories? Anxiety, mostly. Some kind of social withdrawal pattern that started after a bad experience at school. Some kid said something, the way kids do, and it landed wrong. And then the more she held back, the more the holding back became the habit. Sienna looked at her daughter, who was now showing Emma something in her sketchbook with an expression of concentrated explanation. We've tried 6 different specialists. The last one was very expensive and very credentialed, and after 8 months of weekly sessions, Lila told me she didn't like going because the woman kept asking her how things made her feel before she'd had time to figure out how they made her feel. Cole was quiet for a second. Then, Emma went through something after her mom left. Different, but there was a period where she just didn't want to leave the apartment. He turned his cup of coffee around in his hands. I tried for a while to fix it, like it was a problem with a solution, and eventually I figured out that I was making it worse because every time I tried to address it directly, she felt like she was failing at something. So I stopped trying to fix it and just stayed with her. We built a lot of block towers, watched a lot of nature documentaries. I let her come to things when she came to them. Sienna was quiet. I'm not saying that's what Lila needs, Cole added quickly. I don't know your kid. You talked to her for 15 minutes yesterday and she laughed out loud, Sienna said. I haven't heard her do that with a stranger in over a year. He didn't have an answer to that. He didn't try to manufacture one. Across the small space, Emma had produced a red-colored pencil from somewhere. Her coat pocket, apparently. Sienna would later learn that Emma kept colored pencils in her coat pocket the way other kids kept loose change, and was using it to add something to what Lila was working on. Lila watched, then said something that made Emma nod with great seriousness and adjust her angle. They're designing a city, Cole said. I can see that. Emma's been trying to design a city for about a year. She keeps running into the problem of where to put the hospital relative to the airport and can't decide. He said it seriously, the way you describe a real problem. I think she might have found a collaborator. Sienna looked at the 2 girls and felt something move through her chest that she didn't have an immediate name for. Something that was part relief and part grief, and part something she hadn't let herself feel in long enough that she'd almost forgotten what the shape of it was. She picked up her coffee. She did not say anything. Cole did not say anything either. They sat and watched their daughters build an imaginary city on the pages of a sketchbook in the lobby of a Chicago hotel on a cold November afternoon, and neither of them felt any particular need to fill the quiet. The trouble with the thing Sienna felt in that alcove was that she was not, by disposition, a person who trusted feelings that arrived quickly. She trusted data. She trusted patterns over time. She trusted the due diligence process and the reviewed balance sheet and the carefully sourced reference check. She did not trust the instinct that said, this is fine, this is safe, let this happen, because instincts like that had cost her before, in ways she was still carrying the weight of, and she had learned from those costs with the same thoroughness she applied to everything else. So that evening, after she'd settled Lila into the hotel suite they'd booked for the second night, because the drive home and back was inefficient, and after Lila had fallen asleep mid-sentence describing the zoning regulations of the imaginary city she and Emma were designing, Sienna sat at the desk with her laptop and did what she always did when something didn't fit into an existing category. She learned more about it. Barrett Construction Group had been incorporated 7 years ago in Cook County. It had started small, residential renovations, small commercial fit-outs, and grown steadily, if not spectacularly, into mid-scale commercial work. The company had 8 full-time employees and a rotating cast of subcontractors. Its financials, what she could access through public filings, showed the revenue profile of a business that was competent and undercapitalized, doing good work without quite having the cushion to absorb a major setback. It held 2 active city contracts. One of them was the Harrington renovation. She found 3 former colleagues and 1 former employer in common with people she knew through the commercial development world. She sent 2 emails, careful in their phrasing. Not tell me about this man, but do you happen to know Barrett Construction? Came across them in a commercial context. Just doing my homework. The kind of message that would get honest answers because it didn't look like she needed them urgently. She read the news article from 8 years ago again. The commendation was for something called a maritime interdiction operation that had gone wrong in ways the article didn't describe, and 3 people who would have died hadn't, because of decisions Cole Barrett had made under conditions the reporter was not authorized to know the details of. The article quoted a commanding officer who used the word exceptional once, and the phrase uncommon clarity under pressure once, and then the article ended because there was nothing more that could be printed. She closed the laptop. She sat for a while in the dark hotel room with her sleeping daughter across the room and the city outside the window doing its nighttime version of itself. Less traffic, different lights, the particular hollow quiet of a city that never fully sleeps but does lower its voice. She was not sure what she was looking for exactly. She was not sure she was going to find it in a database. That thought was uncomfortable enough that she pushed it aside and went to bed. The next morning, she came down early with Lila and found Cole already in the lobby, standing near the front desk with a set of documents in his hand and an expression that was the most visibly tense she had seen on him, which still wasn't very tense by ordinary human standards, but which she recognized as a departure from his usual baseline. He was speaking to a man in a hotel management suit, mid-50s, silver-haired, the bearing of someone who had been middle management long enough to mistake it for authority. The conversation was low-voiced, and she caught only pieces of it as she crossed the lobby. Wasn't in the original structural assessment, Mr. Barrett, and the delay is because we found a problem your original contractor missed, Cole said. If we hadn't found it, you would have had a safety issue in that wall within 18 months. I have the engineering documentation. The documentation is not the issue. The timeline changed because the scope changed. That's in the contract. The man in the suit said something that Sienna didn't catch. Cole's jaw tightened in a way that she noticed because the rest of his body didn't move at all. I understand, he said. His voice was completely level. I'll have my project manager send over the updated impact analysis by end of day. The man in the suit moved away. Cole stood for a moment looking at the documents in his hand and then looked up and saw Sienna, and something shifted slightly in his face. Not embarrassment exactly. More like the awareness of having been observed in a moment he would have preferred to manage privately. Good morning, Sienna said. Morning. He looked at Lila beside her. Hey. Hi, Cole, Lila said. He glanced back in the direction the hotel manager had gone. Bureaucracy, he said to no one in particular. I heard some of that, Sienna said carefully. It's nothing. Contract stuff. He folded the documents. Emma's coming in at 10. She told me to tell Lila the hospital goes on the north end. Lila looked up sharply. The north end is where I put the train station. I relayed the message. The rest is between you two. He nodded once and headed toward the stairwell, and Sienna watched him go with the particular attention of someone who has just seen a thing they weren't supposed to see and is not yet sure what to do with it. She had heard enough. She knew enough about contracts and commercial construction and the particular leverage hotel management companies held over their contractors to understand approximately what was happening. She also knew enough about men like Cole Barrett, not many, but enough, to know that he would manage it without asking for help, would absorb whatever cost he had to absorb, and would not say anything about it to anyone unless he had to. She took Lila to the alcove and settled her with her sketchbook. She stood for a moment with her coffee, looking at the lobby, the marble, the high ceilings, the quiet choreography of a luxury hotel doing what luxury hotels do. And she thought about the east wall of the 3rd floor and the load path that hadn't been in the original spec, and the man who had found it and fixed it and was now being handed the bill for finding it. She thought about what she knew about the commercial development world in Chicago, who she knew, what kinds of introductions were and were not within her reach. She thought about whether any of that was her business. She went upstairs to her 9 o'clock panel. She paid attention to approximately 60% of it. Emma arrived at 10:15 with a backpack she had clearly packed herself. It had what appeared to be an entire box of colored pencils, a banana, and a paperback book about volcanoes visible through the partially unzipped top. And she went directly to the alcove without stopping at the front desk or looking for her father, which meant she had done this before and knew exactly where she was going. She dropped the backpack, said hello to Sienna with the brief acknowledgement of a child who considers adults to be ambient furniture unless they prove otherwise, and sat down across from Lila and opened her own sketchbook. "The hospital goes north," Emma said, picking up exactly where her father had left off. "The train station is north," Lila said. "Hospitals need to be near trains in case of emergencies." Lila considered this. "Okay," she said, "but the airport is east and the train goes east to the airport, so if the hospital's north, it has to have its own road." Emma looked at her, then she looked at the sketchbook. Then she said, "Okay, but it needs to be a wide road." "It can be wide," Lila said. They both began drawing. Sienna stood at the edge of the alcove for a moment, watching this, and then she sat down in Cole's chair and took out her phone and spent the next 10 minutes staring at the contact in her address book for a man named Douglas Vreeland, who was a senior partner at a commercial development firm she had done business with twice, who owed her a favor she had never called in, and who was specifically connected to a project she had heard about for months through channels. A major mixed-use development on the north side that was in the contractor selection phase and had the kind of budget that would make Barrett Construction's current problem look like a rounding error. She did not call him. She put her phone down. She looked at the two girls, bent over their city, arguing quietly and cooperatively about road widths. She thought about Cole, upstairs, managing a problem he hadn't created, with documents that proved he was right, and a timeline that would punish him anyway. She picked the phone back up. She still didn't call. She was not in the habit of making decisions based on 48 hours of lobby conversations and the way a man had talked to her daughter. She was not in the habit of inserting herself into other people's professional crises without being asked. She was not in the habit of a lot of things that she was currently sitting in a hotel lobby on a Wednesday afternoon considering. The problem was that she was also not in the habit of ignoring problems she could see clearly and had the capacity to address. She looked at Lila. Her daughter said something to Emma that made the other girl stop drawing and stare at the page, and then say, with real admiration, "Oh, that's actually really smart." And Lila looked up for just a second with an expression that Sienna had not seen in so long. She had half convinced herself she'd been misremembering it. The pure, clean satisfaction of being understood. Sienna looked at her phone. She thought, "I am not doing this because I feel something. I am doing this because it is the right thing to do, and I have the capacity to do it. And those two facts together have always been sufficient reason." She was mostly sure that was true. She found the contact for Douglas Vreeland. She pressed call. He answered on the third ring, and she said, "Douglas, it's Sienna Ashford. I'm calling to ask you something, and I need you to hear it out before you respond." And Douglas Vreeland, who was smart enough to have stayed on good terms with Sienna Ashford for 11 years, said, "I'm listening." She looked one more time at her daughter, then she turned slightly in her chair and began to speak. Douglas Vreeland called back at 4:47 that afternoon. Sienna was in the middle of her third meeting of the day, a conversation with two partners from a Houston-based fund who were considering moving a portion of their real estate holdings into Midwest commercial assets. And she let it go to voicemail because Douglas Vreeland was a man who left detailed voicemails when he had something to say and brief ones when he didn't. And either way, the information would be there when she got out. She kept her attention on the Houston partners and said the right things and scheduled a follow-up call for the following week and shook the right hands. And then, the moment the conference room door closed behind them, she had her phone out. The voicemail was 43 seconds long. She listened to it twice, standing in the corridor outside the meeting room with one hand pressed flat against the wall and her eyes on the middle distance. Douglas said he'd looked into the Harrington renovation contract situation. He had a contact on the hotel's ownership side, a managing partner at the investment group that held the property. and the picture was a bit more complicated than a simple timeline dispute. The ownership group had been looking for grounds to renegotiate the contract terms since the scope expansion, and the structural issue Cole had discovered and corrected had given them a lever they were using with some force. They were claiming the delay constituted a material breach. Their legal team had sent a letter. Douglas said the letter was, in his opinion, an aggressive overreach, but aggressive overreach was effective when the other party didn't have the resources to fight it properly. He said one other thing, at the end, almost as an addendum. The Northgate project, the mixed-use development she'd been thinking about when she called him, was still in contractor evaluation. The selection committee met in 3 weeks. If she had someone she wanted them to look at, the right introduction at the right moment was worth more than a cold submission. She put the phone in her pocket. She stood in the corridor for another minute, thinking. Then she went downstairs to find Cole. He wasn't in the alcove and he wasn't in the lobby. She asked at the front desk and the young woman there, a different one from the morning, this one with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the tired energy of someone 4 hours from the end of a long shift, said she thought the construction supervisor had gone back up to the 3rd floor around 3 and hadn't come down since. Sienna looked at the elevator. She looked at the stairwell door. She went to the stairwell. The 3rd floor of the Harrington was not the 3rd floor you took the elevator to. There was a service stairwell at the north end of the building that bypassed the guest areas, and it led out onto a corridor that was currently partitioned off from the occupied floors by a heavy plastic barrier printed with the Barrett Construction Group logo and a hard hat symbol and a message that said, "Active Construction Zone, authorized personnel only." The air was different here, drier, with the smell of cut drywall and something metallic underneath it, and the sound of tools somewhere further in that had the intermittent quality of work being done carefully rather than quickly. Sienna pushed through the plastic barrier. She walked about 30 feet down the corridor before she found him. Cole was standing at the far end of a partially renovated room that might have been a meeting space in its previous life and was currently a study in exposed structure. Ceiling joists visible above, one wall stripped back to the concrete, temporary lighting on stands throwing everything in a yellow-white that made the space feel more industrial than it was. He had a measuring tape clipped to his belt and a pencil behind his ear and a tablet in his hand that he was comparing to something on the wall in front of him. A series of marks and annotations made directly on the concrete surface in various colors of marker. He heard her before she got close. He turned, and for a brief moment his expression did the thing it did when something unexpected happened in his environment. A fast, involuntary assessment, threat or no threat, which resolved almost immediately when he recognized her, but which she noticed because she was paying attention. "You're not supposed to be up here," he said. "I know." He looked at her for another second. Then he looked back at the wall. "If something fell on you, I'd lose my license." "Nothing's going to fall on me." She came to stand beside him and looked at the wall. The annotations were more complex than she'd expected, color-coded, with what appeared to be load calculations written in a cramped but legible hand beside several of the marks, and arrows indicating direction of force that she recognized from enough construction project reviews to understand, roughly, what she was looking at. "This is the problem area." It wasn't a question, but he answered it anyway. Original contractor put the load-bearing calculation on this wall wrong. They were off by enough that the eastern face of the building was going to have a stress issue. He tapped a point on the wall with 2 fingers. "Not immediately. 5, 10 years, you start seeing cracks. 20 years, you've got a real problem, depending on what's above it by then." He paused. "Above it is a ballroom. The hotel does about 60 events a year in that room." Sienna looked at the wall for a moment, then at him. "You found this in the normal course of the renovation work. Week 3. I flagged it the same day." And the hotel's response was to treat the resulting schedule delay as a breach. He was quiet for a second. The way he went quiet told her that he already knew she knew more than a passerby should. "Who did you talk to?" "Someone I know who knows someone on the ownership side." She kept her voice even. "I'm not trying to get into your business, Cole. I heard the conversation this morning and I made a call. If that was overstepping, tell me." He looked at the tablet in his hand. He looked at the wall. He set the tablet down on a work surface behind him and turned to face her with the expression of someone who is deciding whether to be annoyed and has concluded it would cost more energy than it's worth. What did you find out? He said. It wasn't quite a question. That they sent a legal letter claiming material breach, that their goal is to renegotiate the contract terms in their favor, using the delay as leverage, and that their position is aggressive enough to be effective against a contractor who doesn't have the resources to sustain a prolonged dispute. She paused. I also found out that you have the engineering documentation to prove the scope change was warranted, which means if this goes to arbitration, they lose. But arbitration takes time and money, and they know that. Cole was quiet for long enough that she could hear the tools further down the corridor, someone running what sounded like a circular saw in short, controlled bursts. My lawyer looked at it this morning, he said finally. He thinks we'd win the arbitration. He also said it would take 8 to 14 months and cost somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000 to get there. He said the numbers without inflection. I've got 8 guys on my crew. 3 of them have been with me since the beginning. If I'm in a legal fight for a year, I can't take new contracts, I can't make payroll reliably, and I can't... He stopped. I'm not going to let that happen to them. So you'd absorb the penalty. I'd figure something out. That phrase, I'd figure something out, landed in Sienna's chest with a weight she recognized because she'd said it herself, in different configurations for years. The particular resolution of a person who has decided that carrying the problem alone is preferable to the vulnerability of asking for help. She had said those words after Lila's father left. She had said them after the first year with the firm, when she was working 18-hour days and running on 4 hours of sleep, and telling everyone, including herself, that she had it managed. She had said them so many times they'd stopped meaning anything except, I am not going to let anyone see how close to the edge this is. She looked at him. He was looking at the wall again, the way people look at things they're used to solving, like the answer was in there somewhere, and he just needed to find the right angle. I know someone, she said, on a major development project. North Side, mixed use, they're in the contractor evaluation phase. It's a significant contract, the kind that makes the Harrington look like a warm-up. Cole turned to look at her slowly. Why are you telling me that? Because I called someone today and asked them to look at your work, not as a favor, as a professional inquiry. She held his gaze. Your engineering solution on this wall alone is more sophisticated than what most mid-size contractors would have done. You could have patched it. You didn't patch it. You documented it and rebuilt it properly. And in doing so, you probably saved this building from a serious structural failure in 15 years. That is the kind of problem-solving a major development client wants on a major project. Sienna, he said her name with something careful in it. I know you don't need it, she said. I'm not offering it because you need it. I'm offering it because it's a good introduction and you've earned it, and those 2 things are all I need to make a call. The saw in the other room stopped. The silence it left was very complete for a moment. I've been doing this alone for a long time, Cole said. It wasn't defensive. It was just accurate. I know, I could tell from the first conversation. She picked up the tablet he'd set down and looked at the engineering annotations on the screen. His calculations, meticulous and precise in a way that didn't come from formal training alone, but from years of solving real problems under conditions that punished error. You're good at it, doing it alone. But good at something and right about it are different questions. He took the tablet back from her. He looked at the screen for a moment, and she could see him turning something over in his mind with the deliberateness of a man who made decisions carefully because he'd learned the cost of making them otherwise. What would this introduction look like, he said. A meeting. Me, you, Douglas Vreeland, who's a senior partner at Vreeland Coda's development. They're running the Northgate project. I tell Douglas what I know about your work. You bring your documentation and your portfolio, and you talk to him the way you just talked to me about this wall. She gestured toward the concrete surface, like it's a problem worth solving correctly, because that's the thing that's actually hard to find. Cole was quiet again. If he doesn't think you're the right fit, nothing happens, she added. I'm not promising you the contract. I'm promising you a fair hearing from someone whose opinion carries weight on the selection committee. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his eyes that she was starting to learn. Not suspicion exactly, but a kind of calibration, like he was measuring the distance between what someone said and what they meant. a habit acquired in environments where that gap could be costly. Why? He said. She didn't pretend not to understand the question. Because Lila laughed, she said simply. And I've been watching you with her for 2 days, and I've been watching you up here, and you're the same person in both places. That's... She paused, choosing. That's not nothing. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, okay, just that. Not thank you, not I appreciate it, not any of the social packaging she was used to receiving when she did something for someone. Just, okay. The word of a man who meant it and didn't feel the need to ornament it. She nodded. I'll set it up for early next week. She picked her way back through the construction zone and down the service stairs and came out into the lobby and found Lila exactly where she'd left her, still in the alcove, sketchbook open, though Emma had gone home and the city design had been progressing in her absence according to some internal logic Lila was clearly tracking without needing the collaborator present. Sienna sat down and said nothing for a moment, just let herself settle. You were gone a long time, Lila said, without looking up. I was upstairs. Did you see Cole's wall? Sienna looked at her daughter. You know about the wall? He told Emma about it, and Emma told me. Lila selected a different pencil. He said it was like finding out someone built a house on sand and then covered it with carpet so nobody could see. She drew a careful line. He said that's the worst kind of problem because people are standing on it every day and they don't know. Sienna was quiet. Emma said her dad fixes things like that, Lila continued, because if you know about a problem and you can fix it and you don't, then whatever happens after is on you. She said it with the matter-of-fact clarity of a child who had received information and processed it and filed it without the adult tendency to hedge. Sienna looked at the page Lila was working on. The imaginary city had gotten more detailed since this morning. There were parks now, marked with small tree symbols, and what appeared to be a river running through the center with bridges crossing at intervals. The north end had a hospital with a proper road leading to it, wide, as negotiated. Emma said the river was your idea, Sienna said. Cities are better with rivers, Lila said. Rivers give people somewhere to walk. Sienna nodded slowly. She thought about Cole upstairs with his color-coded wall markings and his 8 crew members and his legal letter and his refusal to call any of it what it clearly was, which was unfair. She thought about the way he had said okay, just that, clean and direct, when she'd offered him something he needed. She thought about her daughter, who had barely spoken to strangers in 14 months, explaining urban planning logic with the confidence of someone who had simply been waiting for the right audience. She thought, there are problems you can see clearly, and problems you keep looking at from the wrong angle. She picked up her own phone and texted Marcus, Clear my Monday morning. I need a meeting slot before noon. He responded in 4 minutes. Done. 9 a.m. to noon blocked. Should I know why? She typed, Not yet. She put the phone down and watched Lila add a second bridge to the river, smaller than the first, placed with deliberate precision at the bend where the current would be strongest. Why 2 bridges? Sienna asked. 1 for cars, Lila said. 1 for people who want to stop in the middle. Sienna looked at the small pencil line of the second bridge. To look at the water. Yeah, Lila kept drawing. Emma says her dad stops on bridges sometimes, just to look. She paused. I think I would too. Sienna didn't say anything. Outside the window, the November afternoon was doing its usual slow collapse into early dark, the sky dropping from gray to something heavier and more final, and the lights along the street coming on one by one in the way they always did, as if the city was reminding itself what shape it was. She sat with her daughter until the sketchbook page ran out of room. The morning that changed things was Thursday, Summit's last day. Sienna had 1 panel at 10, a closing reception at noon that she needed to show her face at for approximately 45 minutes, and then she was done and could go home. She should have felt the loosening of that. 3 days in a hotel with a child was its own kind of exhaustion, and her own bed and her own kitchen, and the particular silence of her Lincoln Park house at night were things she had been looking forward to since Tuesday. But as she and Lila came down in the elevator Thursday morning, she was aware of something else sitting alongside the anticipation of going home, something she wasn't quite ready to name. Lila had her sketchbook under her arm and was wearing her gray fox sweater again. She'd washed it in the hotel sink Wednesday night with the focused practicality of a child who had decided it was her summit sweater, and that was that. And she walked through the lobby with the kind of purposeful ease that Sienna was still not entirely used to seeing. Cole was in the lobby. He was not in work clothes. He was standing near the front desk in dark jeans and a plain dark green jacket, and he had a manila envelope under his arm and the particular expression of a man who has done something that cost him something and is now committed to it. He was talking to the hotel's general manager, a different figure than the silver-haired man from earlier in the week, this one younger, with the posture of someone who dealt with problems by trying to make them seem smaller than they were. Sienna heard the end of the conversation as she approached. "Appreciate you taking the time," Cole was saying. "The documentation package is complete. I'll be following up through our attorney by end of week, so whatever timeline your team needs for review, just let us know." The general manager said something in a low voice. Cole nodded once, shook the man's hand with the brisk finality of someone who has said what he came to say and doesn't need to extend the moment, and turned and nearly walked into Sienna. He stepped back. "Morning." "You look different," she said, which was an honest observation delivered before she'd decided whether to say it out loud. "Yeah." He glanced down briefly. "Meeting at 8 with my lawyer, went straight there and came back." He adjusted the envelope under his arm. "Delivered the response to the breach claim. We're contesting it." Sienna blinked. "You said arbitration would cost—" "It will, if it goes that far." He said it steadily. "My lawyer thinks they'll back off once they see we're actually going to fight it. They went after us because they thought we'd fold. So." He shifted his weight. "We're not folding." She looked at him. There was something different in his face this morning. Not harder, exactly, but more settled, like a decision made in the middle of the night that is still a decision in the morning light. "What changed your mind?" He was quiet for a second. "You asked me what kind of problem is the worst kind." He said it like a partial answer, the kind where people are standing on it and don't know. He paused. "I've been letting them stand on it. My guys, I mean. Acting like everything's manageable and not telling them how close the margin was. That's not—" He stopped. "That's not how I ran a team before. I don't know when I started doing it differently." Sienna didn't say anything. She recognized what was underneath the statement, and she knew it didn't want commentary. "Emma's coming in at lunch," he said, after a moment. "She told me to tell Lila the East Quadrant needs a park." Lila, who had been listening with the attentive invisibility children achieve when adults forget they're present, said, "The East Quadrant already has a park." "Then she wants a bigger one." "She can have a plaza," Lila offered. "Plazas are like parks, but with better architecture." Cole looked at her with an expression that was almost a smile. "I'll pass that along." He headed for the stairwell, and Sienna watched him go, and she was doing the thing she did when she was processing information quickly, standing very still and looking at nothing in particular, which Marcus had once told her made her look like she was about to make a significant financial decision, which was not entirely inaccurate. What she was thinking about was the Northgate meeting on Monday. She was thinking about what Cole would look like in a room with Douglas Vreeland, whether the same quality that made him readable in a hotel lobby would make him readable to a development partner who had spent 30 years learning to identify the difference between people who talked about building things and people who actually understood them. She thought he would. She thought Douglas would see it within the first 10 minutes, the same way she had, not because Cole was smooth or polished, but because he wasn't. Because the knowledge was in him without the performance of the knowledge, which was rare enough to be immediately recognizable once you knew what you were looking for. She was also thinking about her daughter. Specifically, she was thinking about the fact that this was the last day of the summit, and they were going home today, and Lila had not asked what happened after. Children asked that. Children with anxiety asked it more than most. The anticipatory dread of transitions, of endings, of things that worked ceasing to work. But Lila had not asked, and Sienna was trying to determine whether that was because she'd accepted the ending with equanimity or because she simply hadn't gotten there yet. She found out at noon. The closing reception was in the second-floor ballroom, the one above Cole's wall, and Sienna spent her 45 minutes doing the necessary work of showing up, which meant 3 conversations and 1 promise to send an email and 1 exchange of cards with a woman from Cincinnati who was interesting in the way you sometimes met people at the tail end of events when all the performance had worn off and you were both just people standing near a table of food. Then she went back downstairs. Lila was in the alcove with Emma, which was expected, but both girls were also standing rather than sitting, which was not. And they were examining something on Lila's sketchbook page together with the focused intensity of engineers reviewing final drawings. Cole was in the 3rd chair, watching them, with the expression of a man who has approximately 4 things on his mind and has set 3 of them aside temporarily. Sienna sat. "She asked me," Cole said quietly, not looking at her. "Emma, whether Lila was going home today." "What did Emma say?" "Nothing. She just got very interested in the East Quadrant Plaza." He looked at the 2 girls. "Emma doesn't do endings well. She doesn't fall apart about them. She just goes quiet and finds something to be busy with." "Lila hasn't asked me yet." "They both know," Cole said. "Kids always know." Sienna watched her daughter point to something on the page and say, with clear and confident authority, "This part is wrong. You can't have a bridge ending in a building. There has to be a road first." And Emma, who had been defending her design choices all week with considerable skill, looked at the page and said, "Okay, yeah, you're right," and reached for a pencil to fix it. "She's going to want to see Emma again," Sienna said. "Yeah. Is that—" She paused. "Is that something that's possible, logistically?" Cole turned to look at her. Not a fast look. The kind that meant he'd heard a question beneath the question, which he had because she wasn't entirely sure what she was asking, which was unusual for her and she knew it. "Emma goes to Bridgeport Elementary," he said. "We live in Bridgeport, about 25 minutes from Lincoln Park, depending on traffic." He said this carefully, like coordinates. "She doesn't have anything on Saturday mornings." Sienna nodded slowly. "Lila doesn't either." The thing in the room between them didn't have a name yet, and neither of them tried to give it one. That was the right choice. Sienna had named things too fast before, and found out later that the name had been wrong, and wrong names had a way of becoming commitments before you understood what you'd committed to. "Monday morning," she said. 9 o'clock. Vreeland Cotis offices on Wacker. Can you make that?" "I'll be there." "Bring the full documentation on the east wall, everything. The original contractor's spec, your correction, the engineering calculations, the before and after." She paused. "Don't dress like this. Dress like someone who works." He looked down at his jacket, and then at her with an expression that was as close to amused as she'd seen from him. "I was going to say the same thing to you. I always dress like I work." "I know, I'm saying dress down a little." He said it neutrally. "Douglas Vreeland is going to feel the gap between the 2 of you the moment you walk in the room. If you're standing there in a charcoal blazer making introductions, he's going to spend the first 5 minutes deciding whose meeting this is." Sienna opened her mouth and then closed it again. He wasn't wrong. "Fine," she said. "Navy," he said. "You could wear navy. It's still professional." "I know what navy looks like." "I'm sure you do." There was a pause. "Did you just give me clothing advice?" she said. "I observed a potential strategic problem and suggested a solution. It's what I do." The corner of her mouth moved. She looked away before it became a full expression, which was a habit she'd had for years, and which she was not entirely sure she wanted to examine right now. Across the alcove, Emma and Lila had reached some resolution about the bridge, and were now working in comfortable parallel silence, each on her own section of the imaginary city, the way people work when they've been doing it long enough to trust each other's judgment without checking. Lila looked up. "Mom," she said, "can Emma come over Saturday?" Sienna looked at her daughter. She looked at Cole. He was watching her with the level expression of someone who has said what he has to say and is content to let the next thing be whatever it is. "Yes," Sienna said, "she can." Lila looked at Emma. Emma looked at Lila. Some communication passed between them that didn't require words and probably never had. Then they both went back to building their city. The reception upstairs was winding down. Sienna could feel the summit ending the way you feel any concentrated stretch of time ending. The loosening of structure, the shift in air pressure, the sense of things returning to their ordinary configurations. Outside the lobby windows, Chicago was doing the Thursday afternoon version of itself. Colder than Wednesday. A thin film of cloud cover that threatened something and hadn't delivered yet. The late fall light that managed to be both stark and diffuse at the same time. She sat in the alcove with Cole and their daughters and the unfinished city and the afternoon coming in through the glass, and she thought about the wall on the third floor, the problem that had been there for years before anyone found it, the careful documentation, the decision to fix it correctly rather than cover it over. And she thought about the particular category of courage that it took to do the hard thing in the direction no one was looking. She had told herself in the elevator on Wednesday night that she had called Douglas Vreeland because it was the right thing to do and she had the capacity to do it. She still believed that. She was starting to understand it wasn't the whole answer. The whole answer was somewhere in this alcove, in the hum of pencils on paper and the muffled sound of the city outside and the proximity of someone who fixed things correctly and said okay when you offered him something and told you the truth about your jacket without being asked. She wasn't going to name that yet. She was just going to let it be what it was. Lila reached over without looking up and turned to a new page in the sketchbook. A clean one. Blank. Waiting. New section, Lila said. What's going in it? Emma asked. Lila held her pencil over the page for a moment, considering. The part we haven't figured out yet, she said. They drove home Thursday evening through traffic that was slow in the particular resigned way of Chicago at the end of a work week, and Lila sat in the back seat with her sketchbook open on her lap, even though the light was wrong for drawing, just holding it, her fingers resting on the page with the imaginary city on it, the way you rest your hand on something you're not ready to put down. Sienna watched her in the rearview mirror and didn't say anything. They had leftover soup for dinner from the container she'd put in the fridge before the summit, and Lila ate without complaint and asked twice what time Emma was coming on Saturday. And Sienna said 10 o'clock both times, same answer, and the second time Lila nodded with the satisfaction of someone confirming a fact they'd already decided to believe in, but wanted the external verification of anyway. She was in bed by 8:30, out by 8:40, which was fast even for her. Sienna sat at her kitchen table with a glass of water and her laptop and did not open the laptop for 11 minutes. She sat in the quiet of her own house, the particular quality of it, the way the refrigerator made its low cycling sound and the radiator knocked once, and the street outside carried the muffled rhythm of a city that was always present and never demanding anything specific, and let herself be still. She thought about Cole standing at the front desk in his dark green jacket, the manila envelope under his arm, and the flat decisiveness in his voice when he said, "We're not folding." She thought about the way he had looked at the wall on the third floor. Not like a problem to be afraid of, but like a problem that had an answer he was going to find. She thought about what he'd said about his crew. "I've been letting them stand on it. That's not how I ran a team before." She thought about her own version of that, the things she'd been letting people stand on without telling them. Marcus, who worked 70 hours a week and deserved to know how tight the first quarter margins were. Renata, who kept offering to help and kept being told everything was fine. Lila's therapist, who Sienna had been giving partial information to because somehow full information felt like an admission she wasn't ready to make. She opened the laptop and drafted an email to Lila's therapist. A real one, longer than usual, more specific, with the things she'd been pruning out of previous updates because they made the picture look worse. She wrote about the 14 months. She wrote about the Harrington lobby. She wrote, "I don't know if it's a turning point or a good week, but I want you to have the complete picture. I should have given it to you sooner." She sent it before she could revise it into something more careful. Then she opened the file she'd started on Barrett Construction and added what she knew now about the breach claim and the legal response, and wrote 3 sentences about Monday's meeting with Douglas Vreeland that were really a way of making sure she understood her own reasoning, which she did best by writing it down. The reasoning was, Cole's work spoke for itself. Her role was to make sure it was heard by the right person. Everything else would follow from what it was, not from what she made it. She closed the laptop. She finished the water. She went to bed at 11 and slept without waking until 6, which had not happened in longer than she could accurately remember. Saturday arrived with the kind of thin, cold brightness that November occasionally offered as an apology for itself. Sienna cleaned the front room without quite admitting she was cleaning it, straightened the books on the lower shelves that Lila could reach, made sure there was apple juice in the refrigerator because she had remembered, from some passing remark Cole had made, that Emma drank apple juice with the commitment of someone who had taken a position on it. Lila was up at 7. She ate breakfast with unusual efficiency and then sat in the front room with the sketchbook and waited with the particular stillness of a child who is excited and has decided that the most dignified way to handle it is to appear very calm. Cole's truck, a dark blue F-150 with a long scratch along the passenger door and a Barrett construction decal in the rear window that was slightly crooked, pulled up at 9:58. Sienna watched from the kitchen window without moving toward the front door immediately, giving the moment its own space. Emma came up the front steps first, ahead of her father, with her backpack of supplies and her coat slightly unzipped despite the cold and the expression of a person who has somewhere to be. Cole followed, hands in his jacket pockets, looking up at the townhouse with the assessing look she was starting to recognize. Not judging, just reading, taking inventory. The scratch on the truck door and the slightly crooked decal were things she was also starting to recognize as being entirely consistent with who he was, which was a man for whom appearances were downstream of function. She opened the door before Emma knocked. "Hi," Emma said. "We're 2 minutes early. Dad said we should have been on time, but traffic was light." "You are on time," Sienna said. "He said 2 minutes early is 2 minutes late." Cole, 2 steps behind her, said, "I said 2 minutes early to an important event is fine. I said 10 minutes early is aggressive." He looked at Sienna. "She summarizes selectively." "I do not," Emma said, already inside, already looking for Lila. Lila appeared at the top of the stairs with her sketchbook and said, "The East Quadrant needs to show you something." And Emma said, "I know, I thought about the plaza thing. I have an idea." And both of them went down the hall to Lila's room with the single-minded purpose of people who have an unfinished project and resent any delay in getting back to it. Cole stood in the doorway. "Come in," Sienna said. "Please." He came in, looked around the front room with the same unhurried inventory he'd given the building exterior, and didn't comment on anything, which she appreciated. People who came into her house and said, "This is beautiful," or "I love what you've done" in the first 30 seconds, always made her feel like she was being assessed rather than visited. Cole just stood in the room and occupied it, which was different. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yeah, thank you." She made it in the kitchen while he sat at the table. Not the formal dining table in the other room, but the smaller kitchen table, the one where she actually ate, which he'd chosen without being directed to and which was the right choice. And when she brought the cups over and sat across from him, the quality of the space between them was familiar in a way that 3 days in a hotel lobby will make a thing familiar. "How's the wall?" she asked. "Finished. We completed the structural reinforcement yesterday morning." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "Ahead of revised schedule, actually." "And the legal situation?" "Their attorney responded to our filing Friday afternoon. They're backing off the breach claim, still trying to negotiate a penalty for the original delay, but it's a fraction of what they were pushing for, and my lawyer thinks we can get it to 0 if we show the cost savings from catching the original problem." He said all of this in the tone of someone reporting facts, not victories. "It's not over, but it's different than it was Monday." "Monday is going to change things further," Sienna said. He looked at her. "Douglas was impressed," she said. "I talked to him Friday evening. He wanted to call me after the meeting himself, which he doesn't always do. He said your documentation package was the most thorough he'd seen from a contractor at your scale." She paused. "He said it looked like the work of someone who'd operated in environments where mistakes had consequences beyond the financial." Cole was quiet. "I didn't confirm or deny anything about your background," she added. "That's your information." "I know." He looked at the coffee cup. "What did he say about the project?" "He said the selection committee meets in 10 days. He said he'd be making a recommendation and that his recommendations carry significant weight." She looked at him steadily. He also said, and I'm quoting directly, "Where has this guy been?" The corner of Cole's mouth moved, not a full expression, more like the involuntary acknowledgement of something that landed. He turned the cup in his hands. "I've been here," he said. "I know." They sat with that for a moment. From down the hall, they could hear the low-grade, ongoing conversation of Emma and Lila's collaboration. Not the words, just the rhythm of it. Two voices and the particular back and forth of people building something together where both of them matter. "I need to ask you something," Cole said. She waited. "Why did you come upstairs Thursday morning?" He said it without preamble. "To the work floor. That wasn't due diligence and it wasn't logistics. So what was it?" It was the most direct question he'd asked her, and he asked it the way he did most things, without hedging, without the social padding that made direct questions feel less direct. She sat with it for a second, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to give it to him the same way. "I saw your face at the front desk," she said. "When you were talking to the hotel manager, you were—" She paused. "You were carrying it the way I carry things, all the way in, not showing it. I recognized it." He looked at her. "And I wanted to see the wall," she added, "because you'd talked about it with enough—" She searched for the right word and didn't find the perfect one. "Weight, like it mattered beyond the contract. And I wanted to understand why." "It did matter beyond the contract." "I know that now." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "I recognized it too. The carrying thing. First conversation." She hadn't expected him to say that, or at least hadn't expected him to say it that directly and that soon, and she didn't have an immediate response, which was uncommon enough to be noticeable. She looked at her coffee. "We're both bad at it," he said, "putting things down." "I've been working on it." "How's that going?" Slowly, she looked up. "Better this week than last week." He nodded once, slowly, like that was a satisfactory answer. The morning moved at the unhurried pace of a Saturday that didn't have a schedule. Emma and Lila came out of the bedroom at 11 and annexed the kitchen table, politely but completely, the way children take over spaces they've decided are useful, and spread the sketchbook out and began explaining to both adults simultaneously the current status of the city's East Quadrant and the ongoing deliberation over the plaza placement, which had evolved since Thursday into something considerably more complex involving a question of pedestrian flow that Lila explained with the crisp precision of someone who had been thinking about it for 2 days. Cole listened to his daughter describe the problem and then said, "The plaza should be offset from the main road, not on it. If it's directly on the arterial, you get foot traffic competition with the vehicle flow." Emma stared at him. "That's exactly what Lila said." "Then Lila's right." Emma turned to Lila with the expression of someone whose expert witness has confirmed the thing they've been arguing all week. Lila accepted this with considerable dignity. Sienna made lunch. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, the kind of meal she'd made approximately 1,000 times for Lila, and which took no planning and communicated something without needing to, which was, "You can stay. It's not a production. This is just lunch." Cole set the table without being asked, finding the drawer with the cutlery on the second try, which meant he'd been paying attention to the kitchen layout in the way he paid attention to most things. They ate. The girls talked about the city. Cole told a story about a structural inspection job he'd done early in his career, where the floor plan on record didn't match the actual building, which he'd discovered by measuring twice and then measuring again, and Emma said, "And then what happened?" With her spoon halfway to her mouth, and Cole said the building had to be partially re-permitted, which had cost the developer significantly, and Emma said, "Serves them right?" And Sienna laughed, a real one, quick and unguarded, and Cole looked at her when she did. After lunch, the girls went back to the sketchbook, and Sienna and Cole ended up on the 2 chairs in the front room with second cups of coffee in the gray afternoon light, the conversation moving the way it had in the hotel lobby. Not in a line, but in the natural diversion of 2 people who have more ground to cover than one sitting allows and have started to understand that there will be more sittings. He told her about the first year after leaving the Navy, how he'd taken the construction job because a guy he'd served with had a brother-in-law with a company that needed site help, and how he'd shown up intending to stay 6 months and found that he was good at it in a way that surprised him and didn't surprise him. The problem-solving had the same structure. Assess the situation, identify the variables, find the most structurally sound solution, just applied to buildings instead of operational environments. And buildings didn't move, didn't make decisions of their own, were consistently and reliably themselves in a way that he'd found, in those first years, to be something close to restful. He said the word restful, and then looked like he was reconsidering whether that was the right word, and she said, "I understand exactly what you mean." And he looked at her, and she could tell he believed her. She told him about the year she'd decided to start her own firm, how she'd done the math a dozen different ways, and the math kept saying the same thing. The risk was real, but the ceiling was higher than anything she'd reach otherwise. And she'd been not quite 30, and Lila was 2. And the rational case was clear, but the human experience of it was sitting in her car in the parking garage of the building she was about to resign from, gripping the steering wheel with both hands and breathing in a way that was not quite normal for approximately 4 minutes before she went in. "What did you do after the 4 minutes?" Cole said. "Got out of the car and went in and resigned." "Did the breathing normalize?" "About 3 weeks later." He nodded like that was a reasonable timeline. "Were you scared?" she asked. "When you left the Navy?" "Yes." He said it immediately without the qualification she expected. "Not of the work or the civilian part. Scared that I'd built myself around the structure so completely that I wouldn't know what I was without it." He turned the cup in his hands. "That's a specific kind of scared. When you're not afraid of the external thing but of what you'll find out about yourself if the external thing goes away." Sienna looked at him for a long moment. "Did you find out?" "Yeah." He looked at the window. "Turned out I was mostly okay, just quieter than I thought, and more comfortable with my own company than most people expected." A pause. Emma helped. Having Emma meant the structure reformed around something real instead of something institutional. That was actually better. She was quiet. She was thinking about her own version of that, the way Lila had been in the early years, the thing that reformed the structure. Before the silence started and Sienna had found herself rebuilding the structure around the problem rather than the child. "She's talking," Sienna said. Cole looked at her. "Lila. She's been, since Thursday. Since the hotel. She talked to her teacher yesterday." Sienna set her coffee cup down. "I don't mean she said hello. I mean she walked up to her teacher before class and asked her a question about something she'd been wondering about for 3 weeks and hadn't asked. She kept her voice level because the alternative was something she wasn't prepared to do in front of someone she'd known for less than a week. Her teacher called me at pickup. She said she didn't know what had changed." Cole was looking at her with the attentiveness he brought to everything. "I don't think 1 week in a hotel did it," Sienna said carefully. "I think it was accumulation. All the work, all the sessions, and then something that felt safe enough to let it move." She paused. "I think you and Emma were that, the something." "We didn't do anything," he said. "You didn't try to fix her." She looked at him steadily. "You have no idea how rare that is. Every specialist, every well-meaning person, they want to address it. They want to help her talk by asking her about her feelings about not talking, which makes the whole thing about the not talking." She stopped. "You just talk to her. About buildings. About measurement. About not being able to undo a wrong cut." Cole was quiet. "Emma did the same thing," Sienna said. "She just showed up with a city that needed collaborating on. She didn't make room for Lila. She just assumed Lila was already in the room." Down the hall, both girls were laughing at something. The sound of it came through the wall with the unself-conscious quality of children who have forgotten that the rest of the world exists. Cole looked in the direction of the sound. "Emma asked me last night if Lila was going to be her best friend," he said. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know. That was up to them." He turned back to Sienna. "She said she was going to be her best friend whether Lila agreed to it or not. That she'd made up her mind." He paused. "Emma's a bit of a force when she makes up her mind." Sienna thought about the red pencil from a coat pocket, the way Emma had walked into an unfamiliar hotel on her father's workday and immediately found the most useful chair in the room. "I noticed." They sat with the comfortable parallel quiet of the afternoon, And at some point, the conversation moved back to the Northgate project and what Sienna knew about the development partners and what Cole would need in terms of bonding capacity if the contract came through. And this shift was seamless because that was how it worked between them. The personal and the practical occupied the same space and didn't compete for it. She told him what she knew about the project's scope: 14-story mixed use, ground floor retail, 9 floors of residential, top 3 floors split between commercial office and shared amenity space. Anticipated construction timeline of 22 months. Budget with a contingency buffer that was larger than the total revenue of Cole's current operations. He listened without writing anything down, which she'd already noticed he didn't need to do. He retained information the first time through, something she recognized because she did it too, and which most people didn't believe until they saw it demonstrated. Bonding capacity is going to be the first question, he said. I can get there, but it'll take a line of credit I don't currently have. Douglas's firm has a preferred lending relationship with Heartland Commercial Bank. That's not a conflict. It's standard on projects this size. I can introduce you to the right person there before the committee decision. He looked at her. The calibration again, measuring the distance between what was being offered and why. Sienna. It's a referral, she said, not charity. You'd be taking on a credit relationship commensurate with the contract. It's standard practice. I know what it is. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. I'm trying to figure out what the right way to receive all of this is. Receive it as professional courtesy between people who have a shared interest in a project going well. Is that all it is? It was the second direct question of the day, and she met it the same way she'd met the first. Not deflecting, not reframing. No, she said. But that's the part we can name right now. He sat with that. The house was quiet around them except for the girls and the radiator and the thin sound of wind against the front windows. Okay, he said. The same word as before, in the hotel. Just okay, but it had more in it this time, and they both knew that, and neither of them felt the need to say so. The introduction to Heartland Commercial happened the following Wednesday. Sienna made the call Monday morning and by Tuesday afternoon had a contact name and a scheduled meeting because when Sienna Ashford called a bank to recommend someone, the bank moved at a speed it did not otherwise achieve. Cole went to the meeting in his work clothes as negotiated because she had been right that the clothes mattered and he had been right that the blazer was wrong, and he came out of the meeting with a preliminary approval contingent on the Northgate contract, which was the correct order of things. He texted her afterward. They want 30 days to formalize, conditional on Northgate. She texted back. That's standard. Vreeland calls on Friday. He responded, okay. She looked at the text on her phone and thought about how much information that single word was doing and how that was its own kind of communication, which she was still learning to read. Douglas Vreeland called Friday at 2:15. Sienna was in her office with the door closed, which Marcus understood to mean something was happening that he wasn't part of yet. She picked up on the first ring. The committee voted this morning, Douglas said. He didn't have a preamble voice. He got to things directly, which was one of the reasons she'd done business with him for 11 years. Barrett Construction is on the short list, 2 firms. The other one is Callahan Mead, which you know. She knew Callahan Mead. Large firm, 60 employees, 20 years in Chicago commercial construction, the kind of firm that won contracts by volume and reputation and rarely lost at the shortlist stage. What's the timeline on the final decision, she said. End of next week. The committee wants a site visit to an active Barrett project. I told them the Harrington renovation was the relevant reference. They want to walk the east wing. He paused. The wall, Sienna. They specifically want to see the wall. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, I'll let him know. One more thing. Douglas's voice shifted, which meant something personal was coming, which with Douglas was always delivered in the same tone as everything else, with the single exception that he slowed down slightly. I've been in this business 30 years. I have seen a lot of people in that building, in that meeting room, making that pitch. And about 1 in 20 of them is the real thing, not the performance of competence, the actual thing. He paused. Your guy is 1 in 20. Sienna looked out the window of her office at the November skyline, gray-blue and certain of itself the way Chicago was always certain of itself. I know, she said. Good. back to his normal pace. Have him available for the site visit Tuesday or Wednesday. My assistant will confirm. He hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand. She thought about a lobby alcove and two girls with sketchbooks, and a man who had looked at a problem in a wall and decided that covering it up was not a solution he was willing to offer. She thought about the feeling in her chest in that moment upstairs on the third floor, standing in the temporary light with the smell of cut concrete and the color-coded calculations on the wall, when she had understood that what she was looking at was someone for whom doing the right thing was not a decision made each time, but a baseline, a foundation, the thing underneath everything else. She called Cole. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the ambient sound of a worksite behind him. Voices, equipment, the particular acoustic texture of an active renovation. You're on the North Gate shortlist, she said. A pause. Not long. Who else? Callahan Mead. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear him processing it, weighing it with the same unhurried precision he applied to load calculations. They're a good firm. They are, she said. You're better for this project. You don't know that yet. I know what Douglas said after the meeting. She paused. He said you're 1 in 20. The worksite sounds continued in the background. Someone called Cole's name in the distance, and he said, without moving the phone away, 1 second, and then was back. The committee wants to walk the Harrington East Wing, she said. Tuesday or Wednesday. Wednesday works better. We'll have more of the finish work done. I'll confirm Wednesday. A brief pause. Then, Sienna. Yeah. Thank you. He said it simply, without the self-consciousness that usually accompanied gratitude in people who weren't used to receiving help. Just the two words, placed cleanly, meaning what they said. Don't thank me yet, she said. Win the contract. He was quiet for a second, and she could hear something in that quiet that she was learning. The sound of a man who was smiling without making it visible, which with Cole Barrett was its own small legible thing. Yeah, he said. She hung up and sat in her office for a moment with the peculiar quiet of someone who has set something in motion that they are not entirely in control of, which was not a feeling she was comfortable with, and which she was learning, slowly and not without difficulty, to tolerate. She thought about what he'd said on Saturday. We're both bad at it, putting things down. She was beginning to think that some things weren't supposed to be put down. Some things were supposed to be carried differently. Not alone, not with the white-knuckled grip of someone who has decided that needing help is the same as failing, but the way you carry something with someone walking beside you, where the weight is the same but the distribution changes everything. She opened her laptop. She had an email to write to the Northgate Selection Committee, a formal letter of introduction and reference for Barrett Construction Group, the kind of document that she did not write lightly because her name on it meant something and she knew it. She had written letters like this 3 times in 11 years. She wrote it carefully. She wrote it honestly. She wrote it as a person who had stood in the east wing of the Harrington Grand Hotel and seen what it looked like when someone refused to cover up a problem that was easier to hide than fix. She sent it before the end of business day. Then she texted Lila's therapist to schedule an appointment for the following week and sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for exactly 1 minute, which was the amount of time she allowed herself for things that weren't in the task management system but were real anyway. 1 minute. Then she closed the email, opened her calendar, and went back to work. The site visit was on a Wednesday, and Cole spent Tuesday evening doing something he had not done in a long time, which was nothing. Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework, long division, which she approached with the grim determination of someone who had decided to get through it by force of will rather than comprehension. And Cole sat on the couch with a book he wasn't reading, turning pages at intervals that had nothing to do with the words on them. The apartment was warm. The radiator in the corner made its familiar complaint. Outside, the first real cold front of December had arrived without ceremony and was pressing against the windows in a way that made the inside feel more like itself. He put the book down. He thought about the selection committee walking the east wing tomorrow, about the wall. The finished wall now smooth and properly reinforced behind its new drywall surface, invisible in the way that good structural work was always invisible when it was done right. You'd never know it had been a problem. That was the point. He thought about the fact that the committee would have to take his documentation on faith, because the evidence was in the numbers and the engineering report and not in anything they could see with their eyes, and that this was fundamentally the nature of structural integrity. The most important part was the part nobody looked at until something went wrong. He'd spent 11 years in environments built on the same principle. The best operations were the ones nobody heard about. The crises that didn't happen because 3 people in the right places made the right calls at 3 in the morning in conditions that would never appear in any report. You learned, in that world, to be comfortable with invisible work, to not need the credit visible. He was comfortable with it. What he was less comfortable with, he was realizing, was the scale of what was in play. Not the Northgate contract. That was a number, and numbers he could work with. What he was less comfortable with was the understanding that the trajectory of the next several years looked different now than it had looked 2 weeks ago, and that the difference was not something he had engineered alone. "Dad," Emma said. He looked over. "What's 7 times 84? 588. She looked at her paper, looked back at him. "You didn't even think about it." "I did think about it. It was fast." "Can you teach me to do that?" "Not tonight." She looked back at the paper with the expression of someone registering an injustice and deciding to absorb it. "Is tomorrow important?" "Yeah." "How important?" He considered. "The most important work meeting I've had in a while." Emma was quiet for a moment, erasing something with the focused pressure of a child who takes erasure seriously. Lila said her mom worked really hard to make it happen. She did. "Why?" He picked up the book again, not to read it. "Because she thought we deserved a fair shot." "Did we?" "Yeah," he said. "We did." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to long division. Cole looked at the page in front of him without reading it. He had been thinking about fair shots his entire adult life, what they looked like, what you did when you got one, what it said about you if you needed one. The military had given him a particular ideology around self-sufficiency that he'd never fully examined because the environment hadn't required him to. In the Navy, you were self-sufficient within a structure designed to make self-sufficiency possible. Your team had resources. Your team had training and equipment and intelligence and the institutional weight of an entire organization behind every decision. You weren't alone. You were just the forward edge of a very long chain. He'd left that chain and convinced himself that the only honorable way to operate was to rebuild it alone. He was now recognizing at 32 on a Tuesday night, while his daughter did long division, not wisdom. That was just a story he'd told himself that happened to match his personality. He thought about Sienna's voice on the phone when she'd said, "You're on the short list." The way she'd said it, not triumphant, not congratulatory, just direct. The way she said everything, delivering information she thought he needed and trusting him to know what to do with it. He thought about what she'd said on Saturday, sitting in the front room with the November light coming in gray, and even, "I think you and Emma were the something." He hadn't been able to say anything to that, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because what he had to say required more than a Saturday afternoon to say correctly, and he knew that, and she seemed to know it too, which was one of the things about her that he kept coming back to. The patience she extended to things that deserved patience. The way she didn't push for resolution before the thing was ready to resolve. "Done," Emma announced, slapping the long division worksheet onto the table with the satisfaction of someone completing a military operation. "Let me check it." "It's right." "Let me check it." She pushed it across the table without argument. He checked it. 5 of 8 were correct. He put a small mark beside the 3 that weren't and pushed it back. Emma looked at the marks with the expression of someone encountering unexpected adversity. "Which ones?" "All 3 are the same error. You're dropping the remainder." She looked closer, looked up. "Oh." A pause. "That's annoying." "Fix them." She fixed them, muttering, and brought it back. "All correct." He nodded. She stuffed it in her backpack with the brisk finality of a person done with a thing. "Dad," she said, zipping the bag. "Yeah. Is Sienna going to keep being our friend?" He looked at his daughter. She was asking the question with her eyes on the backpack zipper, which meant she was asking it carefully, which meant it mattered more than she wanted it to look like it did. "I think so," he said. "And Lila?" especially Lila. Emma considered this. Okay. She picked up the backpack and headed down the hall toward her room. At the door she stopped, as she often did, because Emma delivered postscripts the way some people wrote them, as a separate and essential document. I finished the East Quadrant Plaza, she said. I did it in my sketchbook. I'm going to show Lila Saturday. She'll want to see it. I know. Emma went into her room. Cole sat in the quiet apartment and thought about fair shots and invisible walls and what it looked like when someone decided not to fold. Then he went to bed and slept without difficulty, which was its own form of answer. The selection committee arrived at the Harrington at 9 Wednesday morning, 4 people, which was more than Cole had expected, led by a woman named Patricia Reyes, who ran Vreeland Cotis's project management division, and who shook his hand at the lobby entrance with the grip of someone who had spent 30 years deciding whether contractors were worth their day rate. Douglas Vreeland was there too, standing slightly to the side with the ease of someone who had already done his part and was present as a formality. Cole walked them up the stairwell to the 3rd floor. He walked them through the east wing in the order that made structural sense. Not the order that made the work look most impressive, but the order that told the story correctly, which was the only way he knew how to tell it. He started with the original contractor's drawings, which he'd had laminated and mounted on a temporary display board. He showed them where the load calculation diverged from the actual structural conditions. He showed them the documentation trail, his initial flag, the engineering consultation he'd brought in at his own cost before formally notifying the hotel, the corrected design. Then he showed them the wall. It looked like any other finished wall. Smooth drywall, painted the warm neutral that matched the rest of the corridor, with the faint sheen of recent work. There was no evidence of anything unusual. Everything you need to understand what's behind it is in the package, he said. The before documentation, the engineering report, the reinforcement spec, and the AS-built drawings. It's all third-party verified. He paused. What I can tell you is that the ballroom above this wall hosts 60 events a year. I don't know who is going to be in it in 15 years. I know I didn't want to be the person who knew about a problem and left it. Patricia Reyes was looking at the wall. She had not said much during the walkthrough, which Cole had read correctly as attentiveness rather than disinterest. What did the hotel pay you for the remediation work? She said. Nothing. The remediation was part of the scope as I defined it. They disputed the timeline impact. We're in the process of resolving that. You absorbed the cost. The cost of doing the job correctly, yes. She looked at him. That's either very principled or very bad business. Sometimes they're the same thing short-term, he said. Long-term, they usually separate out. One of the other committee members, a younger man who had been taking notes the entire visit, looked up from his pad. What's your current crew size? 8 full-time. I run subcontractors for specialized trades, which keeps the core team stable and lets me scale for project requirements without carrying overhead I can't support between contracts. Northgate would require significant scaling. I've mapped out the staffing model. It's in the supplemental package. Cole looked at him steadily. I'm not going to pretend I've run a project this size before. What I can tell you is that the management principles that work at small scale work at large scale. The only difference is the number of variables. I'm good at variables. The younger man wrote something down. Cole didn't try to read it. Douglas caught his eye from across the corridor, the briefest acknowledgement, a man watching something he expected go the way he expected it to go, which was its own kind of information. They spent 90 minutes in the building. Cole answered every question directly, including the ones he didn't have complete answers to, in which cases he said so and said what he would do to get the answer, which was the correct response, and which Patricia Reyes, he could tell, recognized as such. At the end, standing back in the lobby, she shook his hand again. We'll be in touch by Friday, she said. He nodded. Thank you for the time. They left. Douglas lingered for 30 seconds after the others walked out, long enough to say quietly, You did fine, and then follow them out into the cold. Cole stood in the lobby of the Harrington Grand and looked at the alcove near the corridor wall, the 2 chairs, the side table, the tall window with the gray December light coming through it. He stood there for a moment that was probably 30 seconds and felt like longer. Then he went back upstairs to finish the job. Patricia Reyes called Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. Sienna was in her car, stopped at a light on Michigan Avenue, when Cole's text came through. They called. Can you talk? She pulled into a parking structure 2 blocks up and called him back. He answered immediately. We got it. She sat in the parking structure in the gray concrete quiet and let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Full contract? She said. Full contract. 22-month timeline. They want to start pre-construction planning in January. He said it in the same tone he used for everything. Level, factual. But underneath it, she could hear something that the tone was working to contain, which was a man who had been carrying a weight for a long time and had just felt it shift. Cole. Yeah. That's... She stopped. She was not a person given to superlatives and didn't reach for one now. That's the right outcome. For the right reasons. Yeah. A pause. I keep thinking about my guys. Martinez has been with me 6 years. He's got 3 kids. He stopped. Restarted. I've been not telling them how close things were. For months. And now it's different. And I still have to figure out how to tell them about the months where I wasn't telling them, and I don't know exactly how to do that. Tell them the truth, she said. The same way you talk to the committee, the same way you talk to everyone. He was quiet for a second. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's just the right thing. She looked at the concrete wall in front of her car. And you already know how to do it. You've been doing it since I met you. You just haven't been doing it in that specific direction. Another pause. Longer. I want to take you to dinner, he said. It was so straightforwardly stated that it took her a half second to catch up to it. Okay, she said. Saturday. The girls can come or not come. Either way. He said it with the same directness he brought to everything. No performance of casualness, no hedge. Just the offer, made honestly, open to whatever it was. I'll ask Lila, Sienna said, but I think they'll want to come. Emma's already going to want to come. She's been designing the restaurant section of the city for a week. Sienna laughed. The same unguarded sound as the one in her kitchen, the one that surprised her each time it happened. Of course she has. She has opinions about table spacing. I believe it. There was a moment between them that the phone line held without either of them filling it, the kind of moment that meant something specifically because neither of them rushed it. Saturday, he said. Saturday, she said. She drove home in the early dark of a Chicago December, through streets that had gotten colder and quieter in the way the city got in deep November, pulling itself together for the long season. She thought about the past 3 weeks in the particular way you think about things that have changed the shape of something. Not analyzing exactly, just holding it up to see it clearly. She had walked into a hotel on a Tuesday morning trying to manage 2 things at once, and had come out the other side of the week with the understanding that she had been managing everything at once for so long that she'd stopped noticing the cost. The cost was in the tightness in her chest in the car before big decisions. The cost was in the careful, partial information she gave to people who deserved the full picture. The cost was in the year she'd spent watching her daughter hold back and telling herself it was a problem with a solution she just hadn't found yet, when really it was a weight Lila had been carrying in the particular way she'd learned it from her mother. All the way in. Not showing it, managing. Lila was in the kitchen doing homework when Sienna got home. She had a glass of apple juice at her elbow and a worksheet on the table and the focused expression of someone working through a problem without complaint. How was school? Sienna said. Good. Lila didn't look up. Miss Ferrara said my city drawing was the most technically accurate thing she's seen from a 3rd grader. She wants to put it on the bulletin board. Sienna set her bag down and looked at her daughter. What did you say? I said Emma helped, and her name should be on it too. Lila turned to a new problem on the worksheet. Miss Ferrara said that was very mature. I said it was just accurate. Sienna sat down at the table. Cole got the contract. Lila looked up immediately. The big one? The big one. Something moved across Lila's face that was quick and warm and entirely genuine. Emma's going to be so happy, she said. She's been worried. She didn't say so, but she had the face she gets. What face? The one where she keeps talking about other things really fast. Lila turned back to her homework. She does it when something's bothering her that she doesn't want to talk about yet. Sienna looked at her daughter for a long moment, at the certainty and ease with which she'd described her friend's interior world, at the comfort in her voice, the lack of any of the careful distance that had been there for so long it had started to seem permanent. "You know her really well," Sienna said. "We talk every day," Lila said simply. "You know people when you talk to them every day." It was such an obvious thing to say, and it landed in Sienna's chest with the weight of something she'd been working toward without knowing it. You know people when you talk to them, not when you manage them or analyze them or research them from a careful distance, when you talk to them. When you tell them the true thing. When you sit in the chair next to them and let the quiet be what it is. She thought about the therapist's email, which had come back Wednesday with a response longer than any Sienna had received in 18 months of sessions. The therapist had written, "I want to thank you for this update. The picture you've given me is significantly more complete, and I think we've been working with an incomplete map. I'd like to suggest a change in our approach if you're open to it. I also want to say, what you've described about these interactions at the hotel sounds less like an external intervention and more like permission." Lila was ready. She found people who assumed she was ready. That's worth understanding. Sienna had read that email 4 times. She still wasn't done understanding it. The dinner on Saturday was at a restaurant in Bridgeport that Cole knew because it was 2 blocks from his apartment and had been there for 30 years, and had the kind of menu that didn't change because it didn't need to. Red leather booze, the smell of garlic and something baking, a corner table that the host gave them without being asked, because Cole apparently came often enough to have a corner table. Lila and Emma were across the table from their parents, sitting side by side with a shared sketchbook open between them, on which the imaginary city had expanded onto 3 new pages since Saturday, now featuring a waterfront district that Emma had drafted at school, and which Lila had annotated with structural observations that the 7-year-old had received with what appeared to be genuine professional respect. "The pier can't be that long without support columns," Lila was explaining, finger tracing the line Emma had drawn. "It's imaginary," Emma said. "Imaginary things should still make sense." Emma considered this with the expression she got when she disagreed but was running the counter-argument and finding it insufficient. "Fine," she said. "Where do the columns go?" Cole was watching them with the expression Sienna had seen on his face a handful of times now. Quiet and complete, the look of a man who has something in front of him that he'd stopped expecting to have and is not taking lightly. He caught her looking and didn't look away, which she'd noticed he never did. "They're going to do this for a long time," he said. "I know." Emma's never had... He paused, choosing the right word. "She's always been okay with being the only person in the room who cared as much as she did about the things she cared about. But she was getting tired of it. I could tell. She was getting a little lonely in it." Sienna understood that completely. Lila, too. She looked at her daughter, who was now drawing support columns under Emma's pier, with the decisive hand of someone who has been waiting to do exactly this. She's been in her own head for so long, even with the therapy, even with the work. She needed someone to just be in there with her. She looked up at Cole. "They found each other." "We found each other," Cole said. He said it evenly, not making it more than it was, and not making it less. She looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "We did." The food came and they ate, and the conversation did what it had been doing since a hotel lobby on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago, which was move between things easily and without transition costs. The Northgate pre-construction timeline, what Emma's teacher had said about the city drawing, a question Lila asked about how buildings stayed up in earthquakes that Cole answered with a patience and precision that had Emma listening too, though she was pretending to be focused on her food. At one point, Emma said, without looking up from her plate, "Dad, are you and Sienna going out?" Cole looked at his daughter with the expression of a parent encountering a social grenade in a public place. Sienna kept her face neutral. "We're out right now," Cole said. "The 4 of us." Emma looked up. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Emma?" "I'm just asking." "That's a question for another time." Emma looked at Sienna with the frank, evaluative gaze she'd deployed in the hotel lobby 3 weeks ago. "I think you're good for him," she said. "He smiles more." Cole looked at the ceiling briefly. Lila, who had been listening with the attentiveness she brought to everything that mattered, looked at her mother and said nothing but had an expression that said several things simultaneously, none of which required words. Sienna looked at Cole. He had brought his gaze back down from the ceiling and was now looking at the table with the careful expression of a man trying to determine how to proceed, which she found, against all reasonable expectation, genuinely endearing. "They're not wrong," she said. He looked at her. "You do smile more," she said. "I noticed. It suits you." He was quiet for a second. Then the corner of his mouth moved in the way it did, which was not quite a smile but was the architecture of one, and he said, "I could say the same thing." Emma looked at Lila. Lila looked at Emma. The communication between them was instant and complete, and required absolutely no words. And then they both went back to their food with the satisfied air of people whose work here was done. The dinner ended, and they walked out into the December cold, the four of them, and the girls immediately linked arms the way they had started doing somewhere in the second week, a habit that had arrived without ceremony and seemed permanent. Cole's hand brushed Sienna's once as they navigated the step down from the restaurant entrance, and neither of them moved away. And then they were walking side by side down the Bridgeport sidewalk with their daughters in front of them, and the cold, clean air of an early December night pressing in from all directions, and the streetlights doing their thing, and the city around them being the city, which was to say, present and indifferent and vast in the way that paradoxically made small things feel significant. She had thought, for a long time, that strength meant the absence of need, that you built yourself into something solid enough that nothing could move it, and you called that safety, and you called that success, and you kept the inventory of everything you'd sacrificed to get there in a locked file that you didn't open because opening it didn't change anything. She understood now that she'd had the definition wrong. Strength wasn't the absence of need. It was the ability to know what you needed and let it in without losing yourself in the process. It was the wall on the third floor, not the cover-up, not the patch job, but the correct work done in the right direction even when it cost something, because the alternative was standing on a problem and not knowing it. She had been standing on several problems and not knowing it. She knew them now. She was working on them, one session at a time, one honest email at a time, one conversation with her daughter where she said the true thing instead of the managed thing. It was slow. It was uncomfortable in the particular way of things that require you to stop performing and just be the actual person, which she was finding was harder and more necessary than she had previously accounted for. Cole walked beside her without filling the silence, which was what he did, and which she had come to understand was not restraint but presence, the particular quality of a person who had learned through years of high-stakes environments that silence was not empty, that it had content, that what happened in it mattered as much as what was said. Emma said something to Lila that made Lila laugh. The full sound of it, out in the open air, visible breath in the cold. And Cole turned his head at the sound, and she saw his face in the moment he heard his daughter happy, and the other girl happy, and the two of them making it happen together. And it was not a complicated face. It was very simple. It was the face of someone who recognizes something valuable and knows it. She thought about a lobby on a Tuesday morning. She thought about a sketchbook page with a building on it, and a child who laughed at something a stranger said, and a stranger who hadn't made a production of it, who had just listened and answered and let the moment be what it was. She thought about the particular kind of courage it took to do the simple thing when the complicated thing was more available, and how the simple thing was almost never actually simple, because it required you to believe that showing up honestly was enough, and believing that was its own ongoing practice. It was enough. She was learning it was enough. Emma and Lila stopped at the corner ahead of them, waiting, still arm in arm, their breath visible in small clouds. Emma was saying something about the waterfront district. Lila was listening and nodding and then saying something back that made Emma's free hand move in the emphatic gesture she used when an idea landed correctly. Cole and Sienna reached the corner. "Cold," Sienna said, which was accurate and was also the only thing she needed to say. "Yeah," Cole said. He didn't put his arm around her and she didn't take his hand, and they did not make a moment of the moment, because neither of them was the kind of person who made moments of things that were real. Real things didn't need that. Real things were just themselves, continuing. They turned the corner. They walked. The city went on around them, indifferent and familiar, and the streetlights were the color they always were in December in Chicago, which was amber and unwavering, and the girls were ahead of them talking about a city that didn't exist except on paper and therefore could be anything. And that was a kind of freedom, too, to imagine the thing before it was built, to put the pier where you wanted it, and the hospital in the right place, and the bridge for the people who wanted to stop in the middle and look at the water. The strongest foundations are not the ones that never faced pressure. Sienna had built an empire on the assumption that what she needed to be was unassailable, and she had been wrong about that in ways she was still mapping. Cole had built a company on the assumption that honorable work done alone was the only kind worth doing, and he had been wrong about that too, in ways that Wednesday meetings and manila envelopes and a legal letter that nearly folded him had made clear. They were both still standing, they were both still themselves, and they were walking down a sidewalk in December with their daughters ahead of them, and the cold was the same cold it always was, and the city was the same city, and something was different in the way that things are different when you stop carrying everything in the same direction and let someone walk beside you. Not because it's easier, because it's true. Emma stopped and turned around, walking backwards in the way children do when they want to talk to the people behind them without slowing down. "Can we get hot chocolate?" she said. Cole looked at Sienna. Sienna looked at Lila, who had also turned and whose expression said, "Yes, obviously. Why are we still talking about it?" "There's a place on Halsted," Cole said, 2 blocks. "Is it good?" Sienna asked. "Emma says it's the best in Chicago." Emma still walking backwards. "It is the best in Chicago, objectively." Lila, "You've only had it twice." Emma, "And both times it was objectively the best." They went. The place on Halsted was small and warm and smelled exactly like it should, and they sat at a table near the window with 4 cups of hot chocolate and the city outside doing its winter thing. And the girls had the sketchbook out within 4 minutes and were working on the waterfront district with the focused energy of people on a deadline only they could see. And Cole and Sienna sat across from each other with their cups and the window and the comfortable weight of an evening that had given them what they'd come for without requiring them to explain what that was. Outside, the first snow of December had started. Not a real snow, just the tentative, exploratory kind, the city checking whether it was ready. Small flakes, here and gone, catching the amber streetlight for a second before disappearing. Lila saw it first. She looked up from the sketchbook and pressed her hand flat against the cold window glass and watched the flakes with the private, complete attention she gave to things that deserved it. Emma looked up too. Then she picked up her pencil and, in the corner of the sketchbook page, in the margin outside the imaginary city, drew a small, careful snowflake. Then another. Then handed the pencil to Lila, who drew one too. Then another. The 2 of them filling the margin with small, imprecise snowflakes that were nothing like the real thing and were exactly right. Cole watched them. Sienna watched him watch them. Some things you don't name until they've been true for a while, and the name is just confirmation of what you already knew. Some things you walk toward one quiet moment at a time, without a blueprint, without a guarantee. Trusting the foundation because you've looked at what it's made of and you know how it was built. She knew how it was built. She picked up her cup. Outside, Chicago let the snow decide what it wanted to do, and the snow came down soft and without urgency, and the streetlights held their color, and the 4 of them sat in the warm, small place on Halsted and let the evening continue into whatever it was going to become, unhurried and present, in no particular rush to get to the part that came next.